Hi, third period. It's Mrs. Anderson. We are going to be reading The Highwayman today by Alfred Noyes. It's a really cool poem. You might have read it in middle school, but it's so good for figurative language, and we're going to kind of break it down a little differently. I figured we'd do it again, and if you've never read it, then that's a great opportunity. So we're going to do a lot with it today, and again, the focus that we're looking at is figurative language, specifically similes and metaphors, which we've been working with pretty extensively this week, talking about how using metaphors and similes, especially metaphors, can really liven up your language and enrich your writing. So we're going to take a look at this narrative poem, and as we make our way through, I've got some annotation notes over here on the right-hand side for you, and I will stop and give you an opportunity to answer the questions and analyze the figurative language that goes along with the piece. So here we go. There are two parts to this poem. We'll be starting with part 1. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. So I want you to take a minute and reread stanza 1. Take a look at the extra help with vocabulary that I've given you. Any word with a star next to it is defined in the right-hand column. And then I want you to break down those awesome metaphors. Talk about what two things are being compared, and then talk about what that comparison does to your understanding of this beautiful description of the setting. So I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, so I'm not going to do this with every single stanza, but I feel like this first one is so rich with figurative language that I need to take a second to break it down with you. So hopefully you've had enough time to look at 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to break them down together and see how close you are. So the first one, the wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. So the wind is being compared to a torrent of darkness. And so a torrent is like a rush of something, and it's clearly dark outside. So those two comparisons let you know that the wind is blowing pretty forcefully in the trees. And again, it's dark. It's just like a rush of darkness from the wind. So see how close you were with that one. So 2 compares the moon to a ghostly galleon. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. So this is obviously describing the moon in the sky. Again, we know it's nighttime. And we know that a galleon is like a ship. So the moon is being compared to this ghostly galleon, which makes sense because the moon is this pale gray color and it does look kind of spooky. And then it's saying that this ghostly galleon is tossed upon cloudy seas. And so you could have even taken this a step further and compared the clouds in the sky to an ocean. And so you get this really cool image in your head of the moon as a ghostly ship being covered and tossed around by the clouds. And so when you really take a second to think about those descriptions, it's, again, that really rich language, and it's all metaphoric. Everything's being compared. Just helps you understand it on a deeper level. And then the last one, number 3, the road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. So the road is obviously here being compared to a ribbon of moonlight. And so the moon is casting its light on the road, and it's kind of curvy like a ribbon. And I imagine it coming like through the hills over the moor. And so here comes this highwayman. He's riding up to this old inn, and an inn is a place where travelers would come and stay for the night. Usually they had their horse with them, and they would stable their horse at the inn as well. There'd be food and lodging, and usually folks just stayed at inns during this time period just for like a night or two. And just to give you kind of a context for the time frame, I guess I should have said this beforehand. We're looking at, let's see, Revolutionary War period in America. All right, so let's move on to stanza 2. We're going to move a little bit faster. He'd a French cocked hat on his forehead, a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of claret velvet, and breeches of brown doeskin. They fitted with never a wrinkle. His boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jeweled twinkle, his pistol butts a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle, under the jeweled sky. So lots of description here. And I want you to take a second to circle the words that describe the highwayman here in stanza 2. So go back through and circle the words that you see that describe him. And then pick a word or a phrase that you would use to describe the way that he's dressed. Okay, and keep going. Over the cobbles he clattered and clashed in the old inn yard, dark inn yard, sorry. He tapped with his whip on the shutters, but all was locked and barred. He whistled a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. So, let's answer this question. Who is he going to see, and why do you think so? Why do you think he's going to see her? And here it talks about she's plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. There's not a question about that, but it's kind of confusing if you don't understand it. All she's doing is tying her hair up with a red ribbon. It's a fancy way to say that. All right, let's keep going with stanza 4. And dark in the dark old inn yard, a stable wicket creaked, where Tim the ostler listened. His face was white and peaked. His eyes were hollows of madness, his hair like moldy hay. But he loved the landlord's daughter, the landlord's red-lipped daughter. Dumb as a dog he listened, and he heard the robber say, "One kiss, my bonny sweetheart. I'm after a prize tonight, but I shall be back with the yellow gold before the morning light. Yet if they press me sharply and harry me through the day, then look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." All right, so let's look. We've got a couple things to look at with 4 and 5. So Tim is an old creeper, basically, and he's an ostler. And if you look at the definition up here, that's a man who looks after the horses at an inn. So that's his job. That's why he's in the stable. That's why he's able to listen. So Tim is described using several metaphors and similes here. So I want you to circle those for me in stanza 4. Go ahead and circle those metaphors and similes. And then I want you to explain the figurative language that you found. What do those metaphors and similes mean? And how do they help you understand him? Really helps you visualize what this guy looks like and how he feels. And as you're finishing that up, I just want to point out in stanza 4, it says, "But he loved the landlord's daughter," the landlord's red-lipped daughter. That's actually talking about Tim, if you didn't pick up on that. So Tim is in love with Bess. Creepy old Tim. Poor Tim. So he's listening to the two of them talk. And do you think that the highwayman and Bess know that he's eavesdropping? And that's your second question with this stanza. And then when you're ready, you can jump down to stanza 5 and reread that and talk about what the highwayman says that he is going to do. And then what is he going to do if he's caught and chased after? When can Bess expect him to come back for her? Because he kind of lays out his plan here in stanza 5. Which makes sense because we know what a highwayman does. We know what he's all about. So answer those two questions for me for stanza 5. So I'm going to break this one down. So he wants a kiss because he's going to get some yellow gold, meaning he's going to go rob somebody or rob some place. And he plans to be back before the morning. But if he's caught, he says, yet if they press me sharply and harry me through the day, then look for me by moonlight. So when's he coming back to her? Nighttime. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. So really romantic language here with that refrain, you know, moonlight, 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 I'll come to thee by moonlight. And so very romantic language, and you also get the feeling, when, especially with that last line, you know, I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. And so he's going to get back to her no matter what. And so you really get a feel for how he feels about Bess in this stanza. And then it continues in stanza 6. He rose upright in the stirrups. He scarce could reach her hand, but she loosened her hair in the casement. His face burnt like a brand. As the black cascade of perfume came tumbling over his breast, and he kissed its waves in the moonlight. Oh, sweet black waves in the moonlight. Then he tugged at his rein in the moonlight and galloped away to the west. So this dance is kind of weird, but you should be able to find the simile. So circle that simile and then say what you think it means. He's not being burned with a brand. I'll just put it like that. So his face is burning. What does that mean about his face? And then I'll help you a little bit with what is Bess doing here, unless you think you've got it and you can keep on trucking. But I'm going to let you explain that simile really quickly, and then we'll talk about what she's doing here, because she never actually kisses him. So he can't reach her. He's down on the ground and she's up elevated in the window in her casement. That's a window. And so he's like looking up at her. And then it says the black cascade of perfume came tumbling over his breast. So she lets her hair down. She doesn't kiss him. She lets her hair down. And then the sweet black waves in the moonlight, it's like the smell of her hair. And during this time period, a lot of times women would wash their hair and then they would put perfume in their hair so that it had this really fragrant smell. And so he's just like taking a big whiff, like, oh my gosh, Bess smells so good. And then he turns and he gallops away. So, yeah. All right, so jot that down. And let's continue with part 2. See what happens. He did not come in the dawning. He did not come at noon. And out of the tawny sunset before the rise of the moon, when the road was a gypsy's ribbon, looping the purple moor, a red-coat troop came marching, marching, marching. King George's men came marching up to the old inn door. So you've got another metaphor for the road. So answer that first question. What does that image create for you? What's the road being compared to? And then answer, and you should be able to answer this question with your history background. Who are the redcoats? We talked already about in the beginning, I told you that this was like pre-Revolutionary War in it's not quite the United States yet, because the redcoats are there. And so jot down who the redcoats are. And they're soldiers, troops. And then answer the question, and it's not explicitly stated, who snitched on the highwayman? You should be able to look back and know who told on these two. And jot that down for me. All right. They said no word to the landlord. They drank his ale instead. But they gagged his daughter and bound her to the foot of her narrow bed. 2 of them knelt at her casement with muskets at their side. And there was death at every window, and hell at one dark window. For Bess could see through her casement the road that he would ride. So, what have the redcoats done to Bess, and why have they done that? So it says, I want to point something out in stanza 8. It says, there was death at every window, and hell at one dark window. For Bess could see through her casement the road that he would ride. So that he is who? Kind of answer in your head. She could see through the window the road that he would ride. It's the highwayman, right? So she is tied up at the foot of this bed, forced to look out this one dark window and watch them kill the man she loves. They're using her as bait, guys. And so she's forced to watch all of this, and she's just watching this empty road. There are 2 soldiers on either side of the window, and she's tied up at the bed. And then it continues to explain in the next stanza, they had tied her up to attention with many a sniggering jest. They had bound a musket beside her, with the muzzle beneath her breast. So not only do they have her tied up, but they have her tied up with a gun pointing right at her heart. Now keep good watch, and they kissed her. She heard the doomed man say, look for me by moonlight, watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. So let's answer this question. Who is the doomed man, and how do you know? All right, let's keep going with 10. She twisted her hands behind her, but all the knots held good. She writhed her hands till her fingers were wet with sweat or blood. They stretched and strained in the darkness, and the hours crawled by like years. till now on the stroke of midnight, cold on the stroke of midnight, the tip of one finger touched it. The trigger at last was hers. So circle the simile here in stanza 10 and jot down what it means, and then hold off on that question, what is she doing now, because it kind of spills over into the next stanza. So just circle that simile. The hours crawled by like years. I just gave the answer. But you have to tell me what it means. There's also some other figurative language within that example that you'll be asked about in a little bit on your comprehension questions. The hours crawled by like years. It's actually more than just a simile. The tip of one finger touched it. She strove no more for the rest. Up she stood to attention, with the muzzle beneath her breast. She would not risk their hearing. She would not strive again, for the road lay bare in the moonlight, blank and bare in the moonlight, and the blood of her veins in the moonlight throbbed to her love's refrain. So what is she doing now? What do you think her plan is? Why is she trying to get her finger on that trigger? All right, let's move on with 12. Tlot, 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 tlot. Had they heard it? The horse's hooves ringing clear. Tlot, 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 tlot. In the distance? Were they deaf that they did not hear? Down the ribbon of moonlight, over the brow of the hill, the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The redcoats looked to their priming. She stood up, straight and still. So what's that ribbon of moonlight again? Jot that down, and we're going to turn the page and move to 13. Tlot, tlot, in the frosty silence. Tlot, tlot, in the echoing night. Nearer he came and nearer. Her face was like a light. Her eyes grew wide for a moment. She drew one last deep breath. Then her finger moved in the moonlight. Her musket shattered the moonlight, shattered her breast in the moonlight, and warned him with her death. All right, so it's like, oh no, Bess. So why on earth did she do that, y'all? Why did she just do that? And then I want you to circle the simile in here about her face and talk about what that means, and think about it. Think about he's coming toward this window, and think about too what her purpose is for killing herself. Her face was like a light. Think about those connections. All right, we're going to read 14 and 15. I'm not going to stop in between. So Bess is dead. He heard the gunshot. He turned. He spurred to the west. He did not know who stood, bowed with her head o'er the musket, drenched with her own blood. Not till the dawn he heard it, and his face grew gray to hear how Bess, the landlord's daughter, the landlord's black-eyed daughter, had watched for her love in the moonlight and died in the darkness there. Back he spurred like a madman, shrieking a curse to the sky, with the white road smoking behind him and his rapier brandished high. Blood red were his spurs in the golden noon, wine red was his velvet coat, when they shot him down on the highway, down like a dog on the highway. And he lay in his blood on the highway, with a bunch of lace at his throat. So we're going to answer these questions. Jump up to, does the highwayman realize that it's Bess that's dead right away? And then what does he do when he finds out? And then you've got some similes here in stanza 15 that you need to analyze. Think about what he's being compared to and what these similes are saying. All right, let's finish this thing. Last two stanzas. And still of a winter's night, they say, when the wind is in the trees, when the moon is a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas, when the road is a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, a highwayman comes riding, riding, riding. A highwayman comes riding up to the old inn door. Over the cobbles he clatters and clangs in the dark inn yard. He taps with his whip on the shutters, but all is locked and barred. He whistles a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. All right, so these last two stanzas should sound familiar. I want you to figure out why do they repeat? What's the purpose of that? And then what ghostly feeling are you left with at the end of this poem? So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up what I need to say before you answer that. And once I get off here, you can answer those last two and then go back and sort of fill in wherever you need to with your annotations. So you're going to watch a YouTube video that says the poem again. It's just a lot more fluid because he doesn't stop and ask questions. And so you'll hear the story in its entirety without any pausing. And it also has some really cool pictures and music that goes along with it. And so we're going to, once you're finished answering this annotation stuff, you're going to watch that video. And then you have 8 questions that accompany this narrative poem. A lot of them deal with metaphors and similes. Some of them pull in other figurative language like alliteration, personification, hyperbole, which should not be a big deal because those are all vocabulary terms that you've worked with before, so that should not be an issue. And so you should be able to get all of that done within this class period and not have to take any of it home. There shouldn't be any reason. But before you get to the multiple choice questions, I want you to watch the video. So I hope you enjoy that, and I hope you enjoyed The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. Bye.